Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our Aerospace Nation series. We're pleased that Dr. Richard Joseph, the Chief Scientist of the United States Air Force, could join us today. As a science advisor to the Air Force Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Joseph's responsible for identifying and analyzing the technical challenges facing the Air Force today. He draws on more than 40 years of experience as a physicist, program manager, and executive, including Air Force active duty service at Los Alamos National Laboratory. So welcome, Dr. Joseph, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to start off by giving you an opportunity to make a few opening remarks on the critical challenges that your team is facing and some of your top priorities as you look into the future. So over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Dave. It's this is a welcome event because there is a lot going on and there are some important decisions that are going to have to be made. Science and technology is the starting point for almost every system that we have. And the road from the research in the earliest levels to the final systems is a long and tortured path. And many of the ideas fall along the side of the road on the way because they, for one reason or another, are not the right thing. But we face today a significant challenge. We face adversaries who are determined and smart and very active. And one of the things that we need to understand is that sometimes we say we just want to go fast, but we're not going to beat these guys by going fast. We're not going to compete with them by going fast, just going fast. We are going to have to do it in a smart way. And we are going to have to, I use this analogy, I used this on the first time I spoke in this job 3 years ago. And I said, years ago, I coached youth hockey. And with young kids, whether it's hockey or soccer, the stars of the show are the ones who can skate the fastest or run the fastest, and they make a breakaway and they head for the goalie and they shoot at what they're worried about. They shoot at the goalie. And generally they hit the goalie dead center and there's no goal. And so you have to tell them, stop shooting at the goalie. Don't shoot at the goalie. Shoot where the goalie isn't. And better yet, if you use your team, you can shoot where the goalie can't be. And it's a very hard message to get to them because the fastest runner doesn't want to stop and wait for the other teammates to arrive. And there are lots of difficulties with that. But the same thing is true here. We can easily fall into a pattern of chasing our competitors, and that's a mistake. Our strength is not in how fast our system allows us to go. Our strength is in the freedom to think and to do, and that allows us to create and innovate, and that allows us to be where the competitors can't be, and to be there first. And that's what science and technology should be providing. It is not the handmaiden of acquisition. And so I just want to say that we developed a strategy. We'll talk more about that later. And the strategy that I was charged by the secretary with watching the development of that strategy and kibitzing. That's the beautiful part of this job. I have no budget. I have 2 people, and but I'm allowed to poke into anything. And and I'm told to be as curmudgeonly as I like, which my friends tell me is a natural role for me. And as you, Dave, have witnessed in the past, it's one that I'm not shy about using. So with that, let's go to the questions.
Yeah, no, thanks, Richard. That's very good in terms of your goalie analogy, hockey analogy. I think it's a very apropos. And the Air Force has been very, very fortunate to have you on board and garner insights from your perspective and experience. So the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board is set to meet today to discuss the Air Force's top technological challenges. As we head into the new year, what do you see as some of the main technological opportunities and hurdles that the Air Force needs to overcome?
I think, part of this yesterday, I gave the Harold Brown Award out, and to an engineer at AFRL, and the thing that I praised him for was not only his creativity and his initiative, but his tenacity. And one of the things that one of our challenges in technology is to stay the course and not be diverted by the next big thing. As long as the concept is sound, we should continue to pursue the research. And I found out yesterday a good example of that. We have recently deployed a test system to Africa for base defense. I'm sure you're aware of that. And it is based on a microwave system. And the purpose is to be able to disrupt and destroy the performance of drones or swarms of drones. And it has been tested, it's been tested extensively. It works remarkably well. I was told by one of the S&T people at the Air Force Research Lab yesterday that 8 years ago, that was a 6-1 project funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, which funds our basic research, 8 years ago. So it went 8 years to its first operational use. And that can be done. So I thought about this as older guys do in the middle of the night. And I was thinking about it last night, and I thought one of the reasons is there were no high-level advocates for the program, ever, until it demonstrated its value. So they sort of kept going with the research, and the researchers kind of kept talking to the operators, kept talking to the system, but they weren't being directed very much by it. And they just kept developing it until about a year or 2 years ago, it became apparent that this thing was ready for prime time. And so they have, with the help, Dr. Roper and others, General Bunch and the chief and the secretary, this system is being given its test in a real setting. So having that tenacity to just keep working at it is one of the challenges. The topics, I'll tell you just quickly, when we built the strategy, I was reading past strategies. The Air Force does this about every 10 years. And I was reading past strategies, and one morning, sitting in my apartment, I'm reading a strategy, and at the end of this 150-page strategy was a list of technologies. And I started reading the list, and it said directed energy, AI, hypersonics, small satellites, UAVs. And I'm thinking, well, these are all the usual suspects. When was this strategy written? So I went to the front of the volume. It turns out it was written in 1985. So I said, this is the wrong way to do this. These are the answers to the problems we have. Okay, but life is made up of even numbered problems. There's no answer in the back of the book. All you can do is try to fit your approach to what you are seeing and what you expect to see. So I was reading the strategy for the UK's MOD, and it was short. It was about 30 pages. And I thought, and it talked about the things it wanted to be able to do and how it would do them. And I thought, this is what we need to do. So taking inspiration from that, we changed the focus of the strategy to the capabilities that the Air Force would like to have. And quickly they were sensing, sense anywhere, sense anything at any time. Secondly, be able to make sense of what we sense, be able to analyze it quickly and accurately, be able to communicate it securely, be able to deliver lethal force in the intensity we want, to the place we want, at the time we want, anywhere we want. That's, I guess, the place we want. And the last one was to exploit and own complexity and time. And the time said we can slow an engagement down, or we can speed it up, whatever is to our advantage. That's an important thing in hockey or soccer. And complexity is we present our adversaries with a picture of our being able to do things in many ways, to accomplish our ends in many ways, both before a conflict and during a conflict. And that tells them, you're not going to be able to just take us on one thing. You're going to have to take us on several fronts, and you're going to have to figure out which ones we're going to use. And so having put this together, it became clear Napoleon could have written this list. Okay, I mean, they're just fundamental military capabilities.
Yeah.
And so then we said, now it's time for our technology community, our warfighters, to get together and figure out what the possibilities are and what we should go after. So,
well, that's excellent. And it's a great lead in, if you will, into my next question, which directly relates to that. I mean, your S&T strategy from spring 19 offered a blueprint, which you've given us a little bit of insight into, for the Air Force to maximize and expand its technological advantage. And it called for some sweeping changes in the way the Air Force develops its new technologies. How does this strategy match up with the new Chief of Staff, General Brown's imperative to accelerate change?
perfectly. And we didn't plan it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he didn't plan it that way, but there's a resonance here. And in talking to General Brown, I mean, I don't get to talk to him very often these days. He's kind of busy. And talking to General Raymond, we have talked about the importance of S&T and about the independence of the S&T efforts. They cannot be too constrained by the desire to have something tomorrow. As General Goldfein used to say, General Brown's predecessor used to say, if I go to war tonight, I go with what I've got. I don't really have any other option. And so what we are developing is we are developing for the two chiefs from now, the capabilities that chief will have. And at some point, you can't just stare at the target. You can't fixate on the target. The goalie is one example. Sometimes you have to look you have to look out of the corner of your eye at the thing. And you just have to pursue a path that will provide you with an opportunity later. General Brown's got it. He says, change or die. He says, we've got to accelerate. And so recently I was asked by, I think it was the acting undersecretary, John Roth, somebody I have enormous respect for. He's a finance guy. He said, so are the Chinese really ahead of us? And I said, I don't know that they're ahead of us. I don't know what the relative positions on everything are, and I don't know how to add it all up and figure out whether they're ahead or behind, but they are accelerating and they are moving faster than we are. And we have to figure out why. And I would submit that, just as the example I gave on the S&T for that system that's in Africa, the 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3 took 6 or 7 or 8 years. If that becomes a program of record, we may well measure the time to build the system in decades. And it's hard to stay relevant with a fast-moving adversary with that kind of a timescale. So what we need is we need to keep filling the pipeline with possibilities. And those are tools for the warfighters to, I hope later we're going to talk a little bit about STEM. I didn't notice any STEM questions, and it didn't occur to me until I was shaving this morning.
Well, you're welcome to jump in there on STEM anytime. I mean, that is a topical subject, particularly when, here's a statistic for you. Not that I would pay any attention to it, but 49% of all the undergraduate students majoring in STEM in the United States are from China.
God bless. We need to.
The numbers are even higher. They're in the upper 70%.
And we need to win them over.
Would we allow student visas to the Soviets to occupy nearly 50% of our undergraduate STEM positions in the mid-1980s? And the answer is no. So why are we doing it for the Chinese? Perhaps a little bit of a controversial topic, but I'm happy to talk about STEM.
Well, that's for another time.
All right. Okay, let's move on. One of the topics that you mentioned or alluded to were unmanned aerial vehicles. And last month here at the Mitchell Institute, we published a paper on the promise of Skyborg and low-cost attritable unmanned aerial vehicles. What, in your view, Richard, are the potential applications for Skyborg and low-cost UAVs?
Well, first of all, for low-cost UAVs, they can add this complexity to the thinking, both our thinking and the adversary's thinking, because we can proliferate them and we can make them all a little different. And picking up on Will Roper's digital engineering, which I'm sort of schizophrenic about. But one of the advantages is if you have the basic blueprint, you may be able to produce RPAs with different capabilities and make them all look like anything you want. You can tailor their signatures so that they look like each other or they look like Santa's sleigh. So I think that with Skyborg, the only questions, those questions are beyond the S&T. I think we can do it, but I think we have some other questions to answer. How much autonomy do we want for a system that can deliver lethal force? And especially one that's moving at machine speed. I worry about the kind of stability in peacetime with systems that are moving at machine speed and making their own judgments. I mean, we know AI is very useful and it's been widely used. I've had 2 special assistants on my staff who had PhDs in AI and machine learning. And I've learned more about the limitations of AI and machine learning than I have about AI. But I've asked them, if I run the same problem with the same data twice, do I get the same answer? Well,
Yeah.
they said in general, no. Well, I don't mind if I get a whole range of answers and I can look at that envelope and decide, but if the machine is going to decide, is going to pick one and then fire some and then deliver lethal force, I want to be really pretty sure of what I'm doing. Because not only could I damage things I don't want to damage and kill people who we do not want to kill, but I could also create tensions in a pre-conflict stage that accelerate the movement toward conflict. And I was charged in the 80s with looking at what the first missile defense system would look like. And one of the requirements, I was charged by the SecDef with doing this large study, a couple hundred people for 6 months. One of the requirements came from Paul Nitze. And he said, he gave us several on performance, but he said, you cannot subtract from strategic stability. And I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out what strategic stability was and how it was measured, because everybody I asked had a different answer. But that is important, and it's a consideration with autonomous systems. So that's what the second thing is, when we say it's low cost and attritable, it better be a low cost if it's attritable.
Yeah, yeah.
But what is low cost? And there are many times we have started down a path for a low cost solution and found out by the time we got done with it and hung all the illities on it, that it was no longer particularly low cost. And so I think Skyborg's great idea. I like that idea. It has a lot of flexibility, RPAs, even more so. But we need to come to grips with how do we coordinate this? How do we control it? How do we command it? And how much autonomy are we going to allow? I have a feeling we will not allow as much as we can provide.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that clearly comes up in lots of conversations. I was up at Grand Forks Air Force Base talking to the folks up there in the reconnaissance wing, and this was a topic that came up and it is being addressed. My perspective is, I think that there are ways that we can capitalize on machine-to-machine decision-making speeds, but they're going to have to be under the aegis or oversight of a human being. And there's obviously lots to be discussed in this regard. The other point in listening to what you had to say there, I would offer that people naturally fall to looking at cost. And you raise the point of, okay, what is low cost? And I have to interject here that that's really the wrong question. The question is, what is the relative value of options in terms of the effects that one wants to achieve? I know that's a lot of words, but it's
no,
really, what's the cost per effect? We'll put the effectiveness back into the cost effectiveness equation. So something might cost a lot of dollars up front, but if it can do an order of magnitude and provide an order of magnitude more capability, it provides more value. Stealth is a great example.
That's perfect, because I was speaking too loosely. Because I was going to say earlier, one of the questions I'm often asked by the air staff is what the ROI on research is. And I say to them, what's the ROI of the F-35? What's the ROI of the B-21? What's the ROI of the F-22? It's an improper question. It's what's the value of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't buy these systems for a return on a return on investment that we can measure. It may be the value to deterrence, and that's probably the kind of thing. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, no, and that's actually, you raised another subject that's very good, and it gets into something that's another topic for another day. But the business of warfare is not analogous to the business of business.
No, it isn't.
It is the most cost ineffective enterprise that man has ever devised. So we need to be careful about bringing business people into the equation. I'll just stop right there because I'll get myself into trouble. And I'd like to move to a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts, and that's directed energy. In June, the Air Force delayed testing of the self-protect high energy laser demonstrator from 21 to 23. Now, given your background in directed energy, you know better than most, Richard, the challenges involved in equipping a fighter jet with a high energy laser. Can you talk a little bit and describe what this program seeks to achieve and where it stands now? And then I want to add another one in there. I'll give it to you now to maybe conjure before you answer, but are we getting closer, or how much further away is the capability to achieve an airborne boost phase intercept with the directed energy we might put on a UAV?
Oh, boost phase. Well, I can tell you, start with SHIELD.
Okay, yeah.
Why are we doing this? We're doing this because the aerodynamic environment, the environment that we have to go through is considerably different from the subsonic environment we took up before with the Airborne Laser Lab and the Airborne Laser. Those were examples of things that had very high level support. And so they spent a lot of money on buying the airplane and outfitting it, and they learned a lot, learned an enormous amount. Was it worth it? Was the value there? I don't know. Because what happened was, from a sort of a systems point of view, the range at which we could intercept air-to-air or surface-to-air missiles kept shrinking. And lasers that are powered by chemicals, the advantage is there's a lot of energy in the chemicals. The disadvantage is that it's a limited supply. Yeah. So there isn't an infinite magazine. For an electrical system, it's much closer. It's still not infinite, but it conceivably, first of all, the lasers are more efficient. So we can take more of the electric power we generate and turn it into light coming out of the laser. And then it's putting that light on the target. So what does the shock wave in front of an aircraft do to the propagation? And then the question is, how long do we have to dwell on a target? How much energy can we put on the target? How long do we have to dwell before we have disabled it or destroyed it? And if you have a missile that's closing at 2 to 3 kilometers a second, you can't spend a lot of time if your range is in the few kilometers. You just, you're not, but since that program started, the performance of the system has been going up, and it's now more than we advertise it to be. So that's all I can say there. Now, as far as boost phase is pretty difficult. It's unless you're doing it from space, trying to do it from space. And that's a whole new issue. I spent almost 2 years on an arms control team in Geneva arguing with the Soviets about what should be allowed in space for missile defense. And there are a lot of strong feelings about opening that up. I think there's a good possibility we may not have a choice in that area in the future. But doing boost phase is key to missile defense, always was, until MDA sort of dropped the technology ball at some point and focused on building a system, which was fine, but they never picked up that technology steam they had had before. However, recognize in the SDI days, our fascination with directed energy was mostly to present the Soviets with complexity.
Yeah, what you started, yeah, what you started to talk about, which is excellent and fascinating, and so perhaps maybe we need to jump back into there. And like you said, there's lots of views on that.
I think it's opening it up. And by the way, there were dividends paid by doing that were very practical, that showed up later. So we would often have a goal of performance for a directed energy or other system, maybe a sensor system, where we wanted to stabilize a spacecraft so we could watch something without a lot of jitter. And it was very challenging. And we set goals that were much higher than the state of the art. And we fell short of those in almost every case. But you know what? We exceeded where we would have been before. And years later, I was doing LiDAR work with a research team. And I would say, where did we get this device from? Where did we get these doubling crystals from? And somebody would say, that was an SDI program. SDI paid for that research. And boy, it just opened up the door to all kinds of other capabilities. And so here we were 2 decades later, or a decade later, measuring pollution in cities around the world, and also being able to detect bioagent clouds at 100 kilometers. And a lot of it was based on some of these technologies that were developed under SDI. It's
Right.
It's the way technology goes. NASA did more than give us Tang.
Actually, I was just thinking of that example as you were talking there. Well, that's great. Excuse me. The Pentagon recently announced that the Air Force is going to lead a collaboration with our Australian military partners to develop hypersonic technology. Can you talk a little bit about what that kind of collaboration is going to bring to the Air Force's efforts to develop a new air-breathing hypersonic missile?
I have not, I've been not party to the details of that, though I've talked with my Australian counterparts frequently up until the pandemic sort of plowed into town. But the Australians are very, very good in hypersonics. I mean, they really are excellent in the science and the technology of hypersonics, and they have worked together. They've worked closely with us for a long time, and we like working with them. I don't really know what the specifics of this particular agreement are. I think it's one of the complexities is we have to renew the topics in our relationship on some kind of a schedule, because the approvals are only given and they're only apparently good for a certain amount of time in certain topics. So it's not an acquisition, but it's sort of like an acquisition. And it has to do with international agreements, and are you making sure you're complying with the law and with international codes and so on. So whatever it is, it's a step in the right direction because they truly are excellent.
Oh, that's very good. Let's turn to space for a minute. In an interview that you gave to Air Force Magazine earlier in the year, you discuss opportunities for manufacturing and assembly in space. Can you discuss a little more about what that would look like and the advantages that it would offer the United States?
Well, you know, sometimes reality is the last refuge of a scoundrel. But I was off the real axis on that. I mean, I can't, I've been trying to remember what the context was for that statement. And honestly, I can't remember. And I've asked my military assistant, Colonel Cerna, who remembers everything for some reason, because he writes it all down. And he can't find any record of it. So I don't know exactly what I was talking about, except I think there was the Space Force did a Space Futures workshop that I attended, and it was excellent. And Dr. Joel Mosier at the Space Force, who's their chief scientist, ran that. And one of the areas they talked about was mining asteroids, mining the moon, settlement on the moon, and all of that. Well, you know, not much of that's going to happen if you have to carry all the machinery up with you. You're going to have to be able to build things, and you would be even better if you take the raw materials at hand and turn them into something useful. Now, you were on that Oak Ridge advisory board with me, and I took the chief scientist down to Oak Ridge, let's see, 2 years ago now, and they got to look at the additive manufacturing capacity and the things they're doing. They're printing a nuclear reactor, 3D printing. And I said, the fuel too? They said, the fuel too. Well, that kind of capability is huge. And it starts to say, if we are going to have real presence in space, and we think we're going to do things that are outside of near Earth, then we are going to have that kind of capacity. Now, is there a defense application to that? I don't know. I don't have one in particular in mind. But again, it's developing we may have applications to near Earth space where we repair satellites. We do it autonomously or robotically, or we make satellites, or we make big structures like solar collectors that can beam power to assets in space, or so on and so forth. You know, it's at some time you have to suspend reality a little bit and just think about possibility.
That's very good. I mean, you raised some excellent points there.
So I wiggled out of that.
Yeah, no, that was very good. That was great, Richard. Actually, the notion, I think the point that you made that sticks out in my mind is, look, if you're really going to progress here, you've got to be able to build capability and capacity while you're there. You can't just haul it all, because it just makes it extraordinarily difficult. In that regard, let's shift just a little bit here and come down to earth, although it could be applied in space, and talk a bit about commercial technology. There's a wealth of opportunity for the Air Force to take advantage of advances in commercial technology. People have talked about that here more and more and more over the last decade, which is encouraging. Would you care to comment or opine about how the Air Force's acquisition process might change or should change in ways that acknowledge the innovation that's taken place in the commercial sector?
Yeah, this is a touchy subject because the acquisition community is watching me all the time, because I'm always, I think they think I hate them, which is not true. I do not hate them, but I think they need an enormous amount of change, and they need to get out of the S&T business because they're no good at it. But you know, we did this before. We did this in the 90s. We went to COTS, you remember that, commercial off-the-shelf systems. And one of the things we ran into is one of the difficulties is commercial entities have to replace their products on a time scale that's pretty short, or they lose out. Their competitors overtake them. But our systems that we have tend to last a long time. Now, digital engineering notwithstanding, you know, if you're General Motors or you're building you're building the pickup truck, the half-ton pickup, and you're going to sell 1 million of them or a year, you can afford to devote a lot of energy into building digital models of all these things. We have used digital models in systems engineering for a very long time. We even used them in directed energy to build end-to-end models of large laser systems. The difficult is that the upfront overhead to build those models is huge. Now, once you get them built, if you're going to make several million copies of this thing with tweaks along the way and modernization along the way, that works well. But if you do as we do with military systems, you tailor them to the perceived future threat, you may be forced to make, and usually are, forced to make significant changes to almost every system in that aircraft. Whereas in the automotive industry, for instance, they have platforms, and they'll have the F platform. And the F platform functions for a whole range of models over a period of years. So that's one difference. The other difference is ROI. As we said before, we don't have that. It's about value. It's about deterring an adversary. And the next thing is it's a very serious business. Now, I know staying in business is important to commercial entities, but they have to be very judicious the way they invest so that they stay competitive. But for us, we have to be judicious so that we don't wind up damaging the country. And that's a whole nother thing. Now, having said that, we have our commercial partners and the industries we partner with have enormous talent and always have had. And sometimes I don't think we make very good use of that. And I'm not sure what the path, if I knew the path forward to allow us to use them more flexibly, I would suggest it, but I've thought about that for many years. Now, the next thing is, if we can buy something, sometimes I get exasperated and say, all right, we can go to the shopping approach, give you a credit card and you go out and buy what you need. And the problem with that, if we can buy it, so can the adversaries. In fact, if we're not careful, we'll be buying it from the adversaries, as we have discovered. So we need to use commercial industry as we always have. We need to go to them on things, and small businesses are fine. I used to own a startup. But you know, you live on a very delicate thread. And sometimes for instance, our procurement systems don't seem to understand it. They think that these small businesses have a money machine in the basement that prints money for them, and they don't. And a 6-month delay can kill them. And nobody wants to do that.
Well, thanks for those insights, Dr. Joseph. We really appreciate it. I thought you really brought some outstanding points to the table. On behalf of Mitchell Institute, I'd really like to wish you the very best as you continue to deal with the challenges that are in front of both the Air Force, the Space Force, and the United States of America. So as a reminder to our listeners, for the next event we've got coming up, it's Monday, December 21st. We're going to be hosting Brigadier General Brooke Leonard, the Chief of Staff at U.S. Space Command, in our next edition of our Space Forum series. So, Dr. Joseph, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this over to the audience for some question and answers. And those of you in the audience, many of you have been on this series before. Please identify yourself and your association when you're asking when you're called upon. So let's yeah, go ahead.
Let me just thank you and the Mitchell Institute for doing this, Dave, because we do not have enough civilized discourse in Washington, as you know. And I look back, you talked about the 80s. I look back, we had some pretty fierce debates, but they were very respectful debates. And we've somehow over the years lost that. And it's not just a recent thing. It has been developing over a fairly long period of time. And what you are doing with this is a great, it's not only a benefit to the Air Force, but it's a great benefit to the country. So thank you for doing it.
No, thanks very much. Appreciate that. And I second the notion of civil discourse, particularly amongst people who disagree with one another, because that's where you achieve progress.
Right.
So anyway, let's move on to the first question from Mr. John Turpak.
Good morning, Dr. John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. I've got both a specific and a broad question about hypersonics. AFRL put out a release earlier this week saying they had tested an 18-foot long scramjet engine with 13,000 pounds of thrust. My question is, how do you test something like that, and how has our hypersonic wind tunnel infrastructure been moving along to keep pace with the testing that has to be done over the next few years?
That's a great question. In fact, you touched on one of the things I had meant to raise on hypersonics. I visited Tullahoma two or 3 weeks ago and visited the wind tunnels there because I'm very, very concerned about our ability to do the testing for hypersonics. And they are on a path to do that, but there are, if you're trying to duplicate the environment, it presents a lot of challenges because it's not just the airflow, it's also the heating, and how do you simulate things like turbulence and so on and so forth. Now, how did they test that engine? I don't know. They have test stands. I don't know where they did this. They didn't. I do not believe they did it in one of those wind tunnels, but they might have. They may have a subscale wind tunnel, and that's part of what we do in the S&T area is we try to understand enough about the system so we don't have to put it in exactly the real environment before we can develop the next step of the technology. My broad issue with hypersonics is there are so many programs. I talked to a program manager in hypersonics for the Air Force a few days ago, and he was going through all the programs that exist in DoD and NASA. And I asked him what the number one problem was, and he said getting people. It's having enough people who know something, know enough about this to be helpful. And I said, well, maybe we have too many programs. Maybe these programs need to be consolidated. And maybe we need to make use of the talents. If you want to look at inlet design, maybe you go to the people who are best at that. Now, I understand there are different settings for the different programs, but we must have some things that are pretty common. And but this is the way we work. I mean, the services nobody likes to depend on somebody else for something on their critical path. And You feel more comfortable if you have control over it, if you're the program manager. I understand that. But we've got to do something, because between the demands that industry has for talent and the demands the government has for talent, and the government never has enough talent, by the way, we're going to have to do something. And making new talent is a long process, although we should start on that.
Sure. Is there do you feel like there's enough of a Milcon project to build the tunnels we need? Or is that something that's being neglected right now?
I would leave that up to the test people, because we talked about that at Tullahoma. They have plans. As always, the financial, the funding details are in flux. And a lot's going to depend on what Congress thinks and how much Congress wants this, and how much, I think it's going to come down to what the Air Force might be willing to give up to get this. I think they'll be willing to give up a lot. The program manager said Congress has been very generous, and they have. They've also been very understanding. And they have essentially almost tripled our budget for hypersonics, wide program. And I said, well, that's good news and bad news, because now you don't have any excuses for not performing. And he had a very sick look on his face when I said that.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, Teresa Hitchings.
Hi, thank you, sir. This is Teresa Hitchens with Breaking Defense. I have first a clarifying question and then a substantive question. The clarifying question is, you spoke about the microwave-based defense or counter-drone system being deployed to Africa. I trust you were talking about the tactical high-power microwave, the Thor system.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure. Okay,
Yes.
because you didn't say the name and I didn't want to assume. Bad practice. My second question and substantive question is that the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board is meeting today, and the topic is space innovation. And I wondered if you might speak to that and give us some flavor of the discussion that's going to be held later this afternoon.
Well, the Space Force has done something. General Raymond did something that was really, I thought it was a very smart thing to do. He created on his staff a chief technology and innovation officer. And that's Major General Kim Kreider, and who's truly excellent and a good choice for that. And so I complimented General Raymond on it, and he said, why I did that? And I said, no, why'd you do it other than it's a great idea? And he said, I did it because you asked me if I was going to do it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it would be a good idea to do. So I did it. And I have high hopes. And I'm hoping the Air Force will follow suit and create a chief technology officer outside of the acquisition area, just as the Air Force did in 1955 at the insistence of General Doolittle and General Vandenberg, who said acquisition is always going to be looking at the near term. They're going to be held captive by the present, and somebody needs to be thinking deep into the future. And I am really happy to say, and by the way, what they did is they took R&D out from under Air Materiel Command and created an assistant secretary for research and development, and created a deputy chief of staff for development. And what followed was one of the richest and most creative periods in Air Force history. I am hoping and expecting, actually, that the Space Force is going to move in that direction. They're already doing great things, but I think that they have set up right to really push innovatively into the future.
Well, Dr. Joseph, here's one from Graham Streetfield, who texts that this isn't a question, so no need to answer, but it is instead something to think about as a scientist. Graham states, I'm the New Zealand Air Attaché, and in my last job in our headquarters, we did a paper on lethal autonomous weapon systems. The acronym spells LAWS, in order to inform our national policy. One of the interesting outcomes was the identification that as well as an AI-driven weapon system being defined as LAWS, a human being is also a lethal, autonomous, and a weapon system. You spoke of concern of AI-driven weapon systems behaving in a rogue manner, yet we also have humans breaking the rules of war since we've been conducting it. With regard to AI-driven killing machines, I think we're trying to hold science to a higher standard than we hold ourselves as airmen. I strongly believe we could and should build systems that ensure that we have the same checks and balances that we have in place for humans. With the ability to record more data from an AI mission, we can actually build and post-combat review accountability system. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you because I think Graham makes a good point.
Yeah, I do too. And I wonder if they can share that with us.
I'm sure now that one of the reasons I wanted to do that was just to put you in contact with him. And so Graham,
yeah, I would very much like to see that.
All right, we have time for one real quick question. So Frank Wolf has been patiently waiting. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Joseph. I just wanted to go back a little bit to Teresa's question just on the AFRL tactical high power microwave operational responder, the Thor system. And just wondered, in terms of future deployments, I mean, it sounds like this does have promise to counter swarm electromagnetic weapons. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what we're likely to see in terms of air-based defense in terms of these types of systems, and if you had any more details just in terms of when we might see Thor actually operationally deployed after the Africa test.
Yeah, I'll tell you this is the way of research. The capabilities that can be incorporated in that system are increasing day by day, and it may not be exactly that system that we want to deploy. It may be a much more capable system. And I had a discussion with the chief scientist for the Directed Energy Directorate yesterday about this topic, but he couldn't share some of the developments. We were not in the environment for that, and I certainly couldn't do that here. But look, it never stops. I think what you will see as we go forward is more and more capability out of these systems. Is this the answer? I don't know, but it's better than anything else we have right now. And I have watched it in action, and it's really quite impressive. I'm sure you've seen the same videos. I actually went to White Sands and watched a test of that and the lasers. They're both impressive, but it's, there's more to come.
Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation event. Thanks again, Dr. Joseph. Your comments today have really been fascinating, thought-provoking, and informative. And before we sign off, I do want to wish everyone and remind them that today is the 117th anniversary of a first manned flight. It's Wright Brothers Day, if you will. So to you, Dr. Joseph, and our audience, from all of us at the Mitchell Institute, have a great aerospace power kind of day.
And a hip, hip hooray to you. Good to see you. You too.
Out here.